everybody. Welcome to the second episode of This Week in Birding. Congratulations, we made it through another week of social distancing. Hooray. So I got a lot of feedback after the first episode, some great comments. It seemed like people like the concept and enjoy talking birding and birds in the era of social distancing. One of the people I heard from was Erin Tedesco, and if you don't know Erin, she's in a band called Congress of Starlings, and they made the music, including some original music for the film Monty and Rose, which I created. Check it out, montyandrose.net, downloadable right now and streaming. But Erin, it reminded me that something I knew about and had forgotten. Is that she had written a song called Raven Song several years ago, and Erin is a resident of the Ravenswood neighborhood of Chicago. And last week we talked a lot about ravens, and it sparked Erin to write to create a YouTube video for that song that she posted this week in response to episode 1. So I'm going to put a link in the comments we can listen to. I'll play a little bit of it here, see if I can turn it up.
Nearest population of these said ravens is in south central Wisconsin.
So we talked about the ravens that unexpectedly showed up at Indiana Dunes a week or two ago, and most likely we think those ravens may have come from Michigan, even though literally the nearest population to Chicago is in Wisconsin. So I looked at. I want to thank Erin for this song, because it's just such a neat connection to make once again. And so I looked into more into ravens over the past week, and I found something pretty stunning. So before last year, the last raven seen in Indiana was in 1953, and it was on October, I believe it was October 17th, 1953. And so then that got me thinking about when was the last time officially that ravens had been seen in Illinois. And I knew it had been a long time. And actually the last one seen in Illinois was in Chicago on October 13th, 1953. So, what's up with that? The last, raven or two ravens in the area were seen in 1953 at Miller Beach in Indiana, which is part of Gary, or really close to Gary, and then here somewhere in Chicago. The book I looked at didn't specify that, but really interesting and a little surprising that maybe the bird went from Chicago over to Indiana if it was the same bird, because we'd always sort of theorized that the ravens would maybe move from Michigan to Indiana Dunes and then to Chicago. So that was a pretty neat discovery as we kind of unwind the tale of ravens in the area. So a few things to talk about this week in birding. First of all, robins. The American robin, the humble robin redbreast, the bird that we see, seemingly all over the place, and especially this time of year. Robins in the past few weeks have showed up on seemingly almost any grassy surface in the area. You're seeing these birds. Presumably, a large percentage of them are migratory birds, and they've always been known as this harbinger of spring. And so something I've looked into and thought about a lot over the past few weeks, as I've seen them turn up in my neighborhood, is I've always been, as a birder, kind of quick to dispel the notion that they truly are harbingers of spring, because if you've been birding long enough, you know that you'll see them in winter if you go to the right place. And one of those places near here, for example, there are a few places, but one I'll mention because I've been there and seen them in winter, and that's Waterfall Glen, which is in the southwest suburbs of Chicago, where you can just see dozens of robins in really the dead of winter. And so I thought about it more because I felt a bit like I was so quick to sort of correct people when they said, "Hey, have you seen the robins? That means spring's starting." And I'm going to have a blog post that's coming out about this in a little more depth in the next week, but check it out on the Chicago Ornithological Society blog. But I thought a bit about, even if robins, some do stay here all winter, it's still pretty cool to see them, because they're still returning to some degree. The ones that are farther south are coming up here now. And it means that the ground is thawed likely enough to make these grassy surfaces viable for feeding, kind of pulling the earthworms out that they may consume as part of their diet. So it's kind of an interesting phenomenon and exciting, regardless if they're here in winter or not. Is was sort of my conclusion. And hopefully, when you see a robin out and about, and you likely will over the next few weeks, if not days, it's worth thinking about this species a little bit more. So a couple of other species I wanted to highlight. First of all, another that's fairly common, but I think fun to think about a bit more than you might is the song sparrow. This is a bird that has a really beautiful song that just kind of resonates, across prairie and sort of other brushy and even wetland areas throughout the spring and summer. And I'll play a clip here in a moment as I'm talking. We'll try to drop that in, but um, it has a wonderful song, and they really can be found almost anywhere, like places like highway rest stops. See them in the middle of summer here in the Midwest. Almost any little sort of brushy patch around on like forest edges. There's often a song sparrow to be found. I think sparrows are really underrated species family, and we highlighted fox sparrow last week, and so song sparrow is kind of in that same category. Another species to be on the lookout for this week is definitely brown creeper. So these are very small tree creeping birds that work their way up and around the bark of trees. Usually they'll kind of work their way around the tree and go to the top of the tree and then fly back down to the base and go back up to the top. And they're migrating through in numbers right now. In fact, I just saw one here really close to Lakeshore Drive, in fact, near where I live, in a pretty, like, not a wooded area, just sort of a place with scattered shade trees. So you can see them almost anywhere if you keep your eyes out, and they make a really high pitched call that can sometimes kind of catch your attention and take a look for them. The other bird that makes a similar call is the golden crowned kinglet. So if it's not a creeper, it very well may be a kinglet, which is pretty fun too. There's a lot to be on the lookout for. In addition to that, I'm going to highlight another unusual sighting along the lines of a raven showing up in Indiana, and that is a wild turkey being seen in Cook County. So this is not a species that one typically associates with very urban Cook County, but the county is quite large. I mean, it's about 75 miles from sort of the northwestern portion of the county down to the southeast. Isoo O'Brien, who's a young birder who's embarked on a big year for Cook County, identified some wild turkeys down in the southeast portion of Cook County last week, and I had a moment to chat with him. So we'll turn it over to that interview. Oh, all right. I'm joined by Isoo O'Brien, who just saw like these wild turkeys in Cook County, which is incredible. And I wanted to chat with you a little bit about like how that came to be, because I think, we've occasionally seen like a wild turkey even here in the city, but it's a pretty monumental sighting. So like I was wondering like how it was that you encountered these wild turkeys actually within the boundaries of Cook County, because that's pretty incredible.
Sure. Basically, what happened was someone put up an Eagle report of like one turkey, said that they saw while they were driving by. And I've already tried in that area for turkey a couple times before, actually, because I know that if I do want turkey for Cook County, that area is my best bet. So I just took a chance, and then I drove down there. I went to the spot. I wasn't expecting to actually find anything, and then I pulled up there. There were just four turkeys in the road, so that was pretty sweet.
What kind of like habitat was it? Like, was this at a forest preserve or just sort of like in a
Uh, it
neighborhood?
was it was a road in between a golf course and a forest preserve. So, yeah, there were definitely some woods around. Wasn't too urban, but yeah, it was a really good bird for Cook County. Pretty happy about it.
Nice. Was that your first ever for Cook County or just for this year?
Yeah, my first ever.
All right, nice. And what talk a little bit about your big year, like, what has gone into that and, how that's going so far as we're, almost exactly 3 months into the year.
Sure. I don't know, but basically, I've always kind of had this desire to like do a Cook County big year, and seeing as this is my last full year before going to college, and now that
Okay.
I can, I figured it's like the perfect year to kind of take that opportunity. Um, so far, we've had a generally pretty slow year in Cook County, but I've had some highlights. The wild turkey is probably the best bird. Ross's goose, northern saw-whet owl was also good. But I mean, with spring migration picking up, I mean the rarities hopefully and the overall total should be picking up too. So I'm just looking forward to see what April and May have.
Yeah, for sure. And were there any birds that you missed kind of in the first 3 months of the year that you're like, oh man, I wish I'd gotten that, but now I've got to look to like next fall or early winter and just hope that they come back.
Yeah, actually, I've been pretty successful at tracking down everything with one exception. Um, Someone reported a Eurasian tree sparrow at Park 566 one day, and I was already like birding in the area, so like naturally I just rushed down there as fast as I could. But then when I got there, there was like three different raptor species flying around, and all the tree sparrows, which supposedly the Eurasian was with, uh, flew away. So I guess it just wasn't really
Ah,
meant to be. I couldn't have made it there any quicker.
oh man. Do you have like alerts set up or are you checking like eBird constantly to like for target species or like
Yeah,
how do you stay in
I've
touch?
got the eBird alerts. Like I've set it up for hourly, so like I get a alert hourly if there's a rare bird in Cook County. And then
Okay.
of course like the Cook County Notables group chat, that the Chicago birding community uses. I've been relying on that quite a bit too.
Yeah. And like in terms of logistics, you're based in Evanston, like I mean, you must have access to a car, I would think, to be able to get to a lot of these places quickly.
Yeah, and Evanston's a pretty good spot to be in terms of doing a big year because I'm actually just 3 blocks from the lakefront. So uh, ideally, when the lakefront is open, I have good access to some great birds, and I'm 15 minutes from Montrose, and I have Northwestern as my patch. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty good location for sure.
So, speaking of the lakefront, like, what are you thinking? Because I'm sure you could have just racked up so many, say, warbler species, like, probably almost all of the regularly occurring at Montrose. Or what are you thinking of doing now?
So it's kind of a tough situation for sure, but in terms of like the regularly occurring migrants, I feel pretty confident that I could still clean those up or almost all of them up at other locations. But I think what's going to hurt me the most is early May is kind of when a lot of casual rarities show up that are um, they maybe show up once a year, once every other year. I kind of call them like never guarantees because it's those birds that you can't really rely on that are what make or break your total at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And I'm
What
mostly worried about missing birds like that, like like a laughing gull or like a lark sparrow
Okay.
or something. Yeah,
Did you say lark sparrow?
yeah. I'm just talking like casual rarities that have the potential for just showing up anytime between like now and May.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think also like you kind of, as you were talking about the Eurasian tree sparrow, kind of the chase you had there, like you just never know when there's going to be
Yeah,
like two species at two spots, but they're in different portions of the county, and whether you can get to both of those spots in time
right,
would likely be a huge question. But yeah, something like a lark sparrow, it might be hard to just
right.
like know that there's like a guaranteed spot for that, each year. It might be a year in which there are more lark sparrows or not as many lark sparrows. So I can
Yeah,
see that would be a concern.
yeah, for sure.
Are you going after a record of any kind too, like number of species in the county? And if so, do you even know what that number is? Or
So well, the current record is 281. which is it's a really amazing record. The record holder had, tons of rarities. They had like a winter finch invasion year, which was really helpful. Ideally, I'm going for the highest total I possibly could. If I was thinking about the record, but I mean, so far this year with the lakefront closure and not a tremendous amount of rarities, it would be pretty unlikely for that to happen. But I'm just gonna try and get as close as I can get.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, I mean, that's awesome. So, cool. But yeah, well, thanks so much for joining me and sharing your story, Isu. And look forward to if I see you in the field, I'll keep my distance, but maybe come across each other somewhere in the fields and woodlands and wetlands of Cook County. So thanks a lot.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so we are back, and that's it. That's the end of episode 2 of This Week in Birding. Next week, we have some fun things in store. I've asked Josh Engel, who's with Red Hill Birding, which is a birding tour company that really goes all over the world, to join me to talk about some of the early spring warblers we can start to expect to see. I think by the end of next week, we'll hopefully see a push of a few more warbler species coming through as we kind of ramp up toward their peak migration, which we'll expect toward the end of April or early May, depending on what the weather is like this spring. So thanks again for watching, and I look forward to chatting next week. Good birding.